Hello and welcome to our 7th episode of the BI Report, a Bright Talk original series that is your destination for the latest trends and developments in the fields of analytics, big data, management, governance and AI for enterprise insights. My name is Eric Topham. I'm the CEO of the Data Analysis Bureau, a data science and engineering innovation company based in London in the UK. With me today are three great panelists. Firstly, Emmanuel Dubois, secondly, Barney Walker and Ivan Scattergood. I'll let them introduce themselves. Emmanuel, would you like to give an intro to yourself, please?
Yes, hello, Eric. So I am Emmanuel. As you can understand, I'm French. And I am managing director of Indexima. Indexima, we are a software company, and we have co-founded Indexima with my partner to help companies to take advantage of their data at scale, and especially for BI purpose, and to better know customer behavior, innovation, and optimize internal processes.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Sounds like you'll have some real insights for this session then. And Barney, would you like to give a quick intro to yourself too, please?
Yeah, hello everyone, I'm Barney Walker. I spent about 20 years working in sort of banks, building trading and risk systems. But for the last 5 years, I've been really focusing on data and analytics. You know, data and analytics really, I think, is a sort of lifeblood of all businesses. So I've been having fun over the last few years working with various different clients in finance and other industries to really build the kind of analytics capabilities that they need to fight in today's markets.
Absolutely, we'll be looking forward to some of those insights from your experience. And Ivan, well, obviously we know each other reasonably well, but perhaps you could introduce yourself to everyone else.
Hello, yes, my name's Ivan Scattergood. I'm the Data Engineering Director at the Data Analysis Bureau. So, well, when it's Eric's job to do the clever data science thing, I build the pipelines that allow us to move the data around and allow the analysis to be done.
Fantastic, thanks Ivan. Yeah, we'll move on promptly then into the session. For those watching, if you have questions, I believe you can post questions into the chat and we'll do our best to pick those up and put them to the panelists for you. So I'm going to start with you, Emmanuel. So I guess the first question that we might all ask ourselves is, why has the cloud become so essential for a robust analytics organization, and what are the key benefits?
Yes, in fact, everybody knows that our customers generate tons of data every day. And everybody knows that up to 90% of the data is thrown away by companies because it's complicated, it's expensive, and to store and to maintain. But all the more with the new normal era, companies need to take advantage of the data asset in order to streamline processes, to innovate, to expand, or to retain customers. And the main point for our customers is to exploit the data at scale in a flexible, agile way, to facilitate the data analysis daily task with a final objective to have no data ops or no data engineering. This is a dream. And cloud providers solutions offer real flexible and agile environment that can scale elastically on demand, and they offer faster and easily deployable storage and data processing capabilities at a very attractive entry price. So the new ops capability allows us to envisage a greater autonomy for the business line in the use of the data. This is the premise. In order to be able to implement the analytical application more quickly, rather than timeless, useless back and forth between IT and businesses.
Absolutely. And so I was actually just wondering, Barney, because I know you've had such experience in finance, and perhaps finance have been working at this sort of scale far longer than most of the wider industry. I was just wondering sort of what benefits and results you've seen realised in your sort of experience.
I think that speed and agility is absolutely key, and I think as well that has sort of second order effects as well. So if you're bounded and constrained by sort of physical kit on premise, you're very, very careful about how you make decisions. You tend to do a lot of the paperwork up front, and sort of talking about things. Whereas if you're unconstrained by that, there's a lot easier chance there to experiment. And experimentation makes for much better decisions. And so instead of going for the one that you think best, is why don't you test the top 10 things out there? And that makes decision making quicker, but it also makes sure that you get the right decisions, the best decisions that are going to pay off most, and the best investments in there. So I think there's a really important sort of side effect of that agility, that it makes your decision making on what tools, what models, what investments to make a lot better. And that means that those sort of investments in those things are sort of compounded as well over time, because you're doing things quicker, you're making better decisions, you're getting things in place earlier, and the benefits that you realise really then compound over time. And so I think you see a real sort of exponential growth in value that's being delivered, and ultimately that can drive a much more profitable organization and really give you an edge. And to me it really does come back to that. It's the agility, but also the opportunity to exploit tools and capabilities that would be impossible to implement in a timely fashion in internally.
Absolutely. And I think that when people talk about organizational data architectures of the future, particularly when it comes to the implementation of machine learning driven applications, these interconnected data flows to allow those systems to extract the most variety of data to deliver value is critical, and also to help individuals, as you say, sort of experiment around between different data sources for a particular problem that they may be trying to solve. Ivan, I know that you also came originally from a background in finance and working with on-prem systems, and now into the cloud, but with a particular focus around delivering sort of machine learning solutions. So in that slightly more specific scenario, what are the benefits that you see of working in the cloud?
Well, I completely agree with Barney that basically having the capability of running things in the cloud allows you to experiment with a lot of other a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to use on-prem. Unfortunately, the cloud isn't a panacea. It's not a silver bullet that will solve all of your issues, but it is a great place to try out new technologies, and you can spin things up and get them working in an environment without spending months of time waiting for an internal team to give you the kit. I mean, again, as you say, I've worked from a finance background, and I've been waiting 6 months for a server to turn up. So the advantage of being able to spin things up in the cloud, test them out, and work out whether it's going to work or not going to work in a very short space of time, and then you can make a real plan.
But do you see any instances, therefore, where in fact there is still a need for on-premise infrastructure, or indeed hybrid architectures where we're running some jobs on-prem and some jobs in the cloud?
In fact, probably what's happening more now is actually multi-cloud solutions, where you're getting data from you've already got data sitting in one cloud solution or on-prem, and you're then having to move that data around into another cloud solution so you can get so you can use the tools that are available in that environment. And I've actually seen some clients who have found that those kind of situations have made things very difficult for themselves. But it's actually, again, just like when you're building an on-premise solution, you've got to understand the technical limitations of the platforms that you're using, and experimentation allows you to fix take new approaches. So, for example, we're in the middle of building a data solution for one of our clients, and they've got a process that's running on a third-party supplier's platform, and they've historically only been able to access that from a certain set of fixed IP addresses. Now, what we've done is work with that company to get them to install an agent on their side, which pushes the data to us rather than pulling it through a specific firewall port. And that gives us actually more flexibility to deal with the data than was our original plan, which was to use their REST API and drag the data that way around. So again, there's all the different tools and technologies are there, and it's finding the right one to solve the problem at the right time.
Absolutely. And so I think you touched on sort of people creating problems for themselves. And Emmanuel, I wondered if you could perhaps give us an insight as to what you consider the the important aspects are that organizations need to evaluate and consider when exploring the cloud generally for their analytic needs, or indeed when considering different options between different cloud providers.
Yes, it's a really good question, and just to answer and to make a comment on what said Ivan, we've been working for a bank two years ago, and we have been waiting for the data to be available for a year.
Can't rush perfection.
Yes. And last week, we get in touch with another customers in the cloud, and we decided to demonstrate the value of Indexima, and we did it the day after. And the data was available in Snowflake, so we did the demonstration within 2 days after 1 day of decision. So this is definitely the key benefit of the cloud, the agility and the easyability to make things happen very quickly without the complexity of an internal organization. Yes, it's a real key point. So the first consideration for me is when you want to migrate to the cloud is to avoiding the replication of the complexity of an on-prem system, and to take advantage of the no-ops offered by the cloud provider infrastructure. So don't replicate the complexity on on-prem, and don't migrate one for one. And in order to ensure the benefits of agility and quick decision. And we've recently published a benchmark migrating from on-prem Hadoop framework to cloud data warehouse like Snowflake, BigQuery, or that kind of stuff. And it fastened the deployment from months to minutes, hours. So the deployment phase is really quite easy. But then remain step 2. It's access to data and use of the data. Because would you move to a performant cloud data warehouse that accept a dashboard response time of 30 seconds each time your end user interact with your dashboard? Probably not. So the response time to interact with your data is seen as unacceptable for a majority of users, because you want to enlarge the power of your cloud data warehouse, but it may become very expensive, and this is the stop for me. Cloud may become very expensive to use at production scale because of the cost of Snowflake, BigQuery, or data warehouse. So you need to control your budget if you want to use your data at scale in your analytic use case, and especially on real big data use case.
Absolutely, and cost and scalability, I think, is something that we'll come on to shortly. But there was actually just a related question here that's popped up from Joshua that I think I'll point to Barney, which is in the multi-cloud scenario, how do you insulate yourself from cloud vendor lock-in while still using the cloud services that are available? Barney wants to know sort of what matters and what should you make independent in terms of technology.
I think this is a really good question, and you know, banks especially, you know, they're terrified of sort of concentration risk onto particular vendors for very good reason, and you know, and there's this sort of regulatory oversight and constraint on how many of your eggs you can put into those singular baskets. So but a lot of the value, certainly, you know, over the last few years has been, you know, as Emmanuel said, in simplicity of leveraging all of the native tools on cloud platforms. So it's been a very difficult juggling act, I'd say, and I think there's a few things that can be done. One, I think a lot of the new tools coming out that are starting to lead the market are sort of vendor independent. You know, we've mentioned Snowflake there, which has made a massive play on not only running on the different cloud environments, but being able to link them up as well in real time and have automatic replication between them. So sort of building in massive sort of resiliency onto what's already a very resilient you know, set of platforms. So that's one thing. I think it's looking at, you know, can you get the value out of those tools which don't sort of lock you in so much. The other thing is just, you know, it's good design. You know, it's no coincidence that over the last few years, things like sort of microservices, containerization and things, a lot of approaches that are really aimed at being able to pick things up and deploy them in different places in a very, very automated way. You know, it's no coincidence that those types of tools have really progressed very, very fast. And so those tools and those approaches, I think, can help as well. And then I think you've got to be sensible on this stuff. You know, things are always risk reward, aren't they? So you've got to look at horizons, and that combination of sort of decent design and saying, well, we may have some sort of vendor lock in there, but you know, can we design things so at least within a reasonable time frame we could lift and shift or move those services, those capabilities. You know, it might be that that's actually okay because the payoffs for taking that risk of some level of lock-in are so big. You know, and you got to remember, some companies and some sort of, especially startup firms, that this is sort of existential risk that they're taking, because if they don't leap forward in business terms, they're going to be dead. So, you know, I think you've got to be sensible and pragmatic on assessing the risk, assessing the return, looking at time frames, and you're making just sensible strategic choices there. And then over time, as I say, I think you can develop both sort of design, architecture, and tooling decisions that help to insulate you from that risk as well.
Absolutely, and it's funny you talk about risk, because I was just thinking to myself that though we had sort of touched on you know, cloud and on-prem, we should, you know, not consider things like risk unless we ask ourselves, you know, when should we not use the cloud, or when we should consider not using the cloud. And so, Emmanuel, I just wondered whether you had some thoughts there.
I would say never. You should go to the cloud. So go to the cloud, of course. But taking into account the use cases, but go because you delegate definitely most of the IT to the cloud provider, whom it is the expertise. So all companies should take advantage of this to go to the cloud. Then it will depend, of course, on the company, of the maturity of the company, the sensibility of the data, and I work with different kind of company, conservative company, bank. They are quite conservative. Are digital native, they are very agile, and they are cloud native. And I can see different level of maturity. The digital company are right now, they have one main cloud providers, one cloud provider, and now they are doing multi-cloud architecture because they don't want to be stuck to one provider. So they're a step ahead. And the conservatives, the bank, the utilities, the telco are just starting to migrate massively into the cloud for non-sensitive data. And of course, as there are large companies, many architects, many experts, in the same time, they are trying to think how to not to be stuck to the one cloud provider. But we can see different level of sensitivity. But we are working with a telco operator in Europe, the main one, Orange, and they have decided to migrate the data to the cloud and to migrate the non-sensitive data first, with a very clear objective: reduce operating cost and accelerate the go-to-market, because it takes so much time for them to go live for an analytic project right now with the internal teams. They want to accelerate the go-to-market when they go to the cloud. But what I said, pay attention, because when you use the cloud, you use the performance, it can be great, but you need to get also to solve the dilemma between cost and performance, because cloud might be very attractive at the entry cost, but it might be very expensive at the end of the day when you go massively in the cloud.
Absolutely, and so that trade-off between performance and cost, I think, is something I know, Ivan, we come across regularly with our customers. And so, from your point of view, when we're working with those customers, what are some of those key considerations? And I mean, maybe you can flavour it as well with some of the sort of more sort of specific view from the ML sphere, as it were.
Yeah, well, it's been interesting, because the with an on-premise environment, the time scales over which you run pieces of kit, you're thinking of them in terms of, well, this piece of kit I'll have on the books for 3 years and I'll depreciate it over that time. And so, but when you're running machine learning models in the cloud, the cost is done well per second, or even usually run on a budget of a per hour. You get charged for something being spun up for an hour at a time. And so you have to be be careful when you're monitoring those time, the amount of time that things are running for. You have to be careful, understanding that they're going to give you the return on investment that you want. So, for example, we're doing a machine learning project at the moment for a company out in the States, and we're trying to predict customer churn. Now, we could run that model more frequently. We could run it every day or every hour, but there's no need, because of the horizon, the length of time between when a customer is likely to leave the company and when they are when the accounts team have enough information to make the decision, right, we're going to try and win this customer back and stop them leaving. So you've got to take the balance of how frequently you've got to run models against their return and how much money they can save you.
And of course, in the development phase as well, from our perspective, there's an issue of the compute costs for training and validation and testing and things. But of course, this issue of cost, as I think we've probably all come across, can be quite opaque sometimes with working with some of those cloud providers. And so one of my questions I always have is, how are we going to get the best visibility on those costs, and how are we going to control them? So, I mean, I'll just continue with you for a second, Ivan, but so from our perspective, what's the experience that we've had in trying to implement cost control in the cloud?
Well, I must admit, I've been very impressed with the tools that are available in the Azure cloud for cost control, because they will frequently you can analyze the costs as they're going along each day, and at the beginning of the month they will give you a prediction of how much your environment will cost, and you can break down the information by individual resources and understand what things are going to cost. But as with any of these tools, there are little gotchas that will come and get you. Another one of our clients is a non-for-profit, and so we were able to get for them a reasonable sum of money each year that they could use as a free credits, because they're a non-for-profit. But you then don't get any information about what you're spending that money on, and you then have to go back to the find the one person who's got the credit card statement that tells you how much things are being spent on. And so all of a sudden, all of that great information that you usually use to analyze these kind of problems goes back to a very opaque on-prem world where you're asking for receipts from a different department. And so you have to be careful of which subscription and which technology you sign up to begin with. But again, like with all these experiments, you can try something out for a short period of time, test it out, maybe find some problems, but then work on the solution and iterate and constantly improve.
Thanks. And Barney, I actually wondered whether, from your sort of quite diverse experience, you'd seen any sort of particularly good or bad instances where people had either been sort of really hot on their cost control, or perhaps more entertainingly, but with a good lesson about where cost control has been overlooked, and some of the lessons from that.
It's actually really fascinating, because it is a fundamental sort of business model and operating model change, because you're going from a situation where your near-term constraint is physical. You just physically can't run any more on a box, and you can't just go out and buy another box because you've got to go through 18 committees and wait 6 months and things. And firms have been running on that basis pretty much. We've had the private cloud and things sort of for a long time, but pretty much we've been constrained by the technology for many years, and the accounting that's gone on around that. And it might not make sense in a lot of places, but it's mature and we've got used to it. And people know that they physically can't really spend any more money without going through and buying something. And then you're going to a world where your power to do things is unconstrained, but also your power to spend money is unconstrained as well. And so I have seen instances where I know one guy got fired for because he'd spun up some sort of 4XL cluster on one of our favorite suppliers, and ran it for the whole weekend just to see how much stuff it could punch through, so he could use it in the benchmark.
Whilst burning £10 notes.
And then he spent 25 grand. So that's the problem, and it's not a mature model either. As you say, there's lots of sort of little gotchas and things. So I think you just got to face it up front. Look, it's a change of business model. I think business lines have to take the responsibility, as they do for any of their sort of costs, in putting in the right controls and things around that. And if that means you have to have a Azure or Amazon cost expert in there sort of helping you with that, that's what you've got to do. It's a real sort of fit through the operating model. Don't be afraid of it. Recognize the risks up front, but take responsibility for it. I think the other thing that you sort of need on there is to start sort of looking at that on a lot shorter cycles. We've talked about data and things. There's a lot of data out there, and it might not be exact, but you can get a very good idea of what you're spending if you instrument what you're doing fairly well, and watch that on a regular basis. And so I think I think it's macro level, it's an operating model challenge. You've got to treat that like any of your operational and other things that and it's an operation that has a lot of risk if you can spend You can spend a ton of money, but you've got to put the controls in place. You've got to put very sort of professional people who know what they're doing in there, and you've got to treat it like any sort of business function like that. And so I think that's it. All of these things are inexact, but the world we come from is inexact as well. It's just the risks are probably higher when you move to the cloud.
Yeah, so let's now imagine that we've kind of decided that we're comfortable with the cost, we understand the risks, we've made the decision that we want to go to the cloud in some capacity. Emmanuel, how do you actually start going about a cloud analytics migration?
In fact, it's real based on the use case. And from my point, customers need to synchronize the 3 steps of migration: deploy and synchro with your data sources, access and use. And definitely the results, there is a real benefit for the deployment phase when you migrate to the cloud on the deploy and synchro, because it's really quite easy. And then access and use the data, it's still a pain. And for a question of cost, we already talk about it. And this is, in fact, really where Indexima comes in. We are talking with our customers based on how much does it cost when you migrate to Snowflake to BigQuery, because the cost of this fantastic data warehouse is based on the usage, and it can be very expensive. And the question with our customers when they migrate is, how easy? Is it easiest? Yes, it is. Is it fastest? Yes, it is. Is it cheaper? No, it's not. And are you stuck to one provider? Yes. And this is really our use case now. We put our layer between, and definitely on the BI use case, we put Indexima in between Tableau, Power BI, any kind of BI tool, and data sources. It can be Snowflake, it can be BigQuery, it can be the both of them, in order to use the auto-sleep function of this fantastic data warehouse and stop paying for them, and make and without stopping the service for data analysts. And this is great, and this is really the use case. Then how do you start from a customer point of view? I think we need to think big, and to start with a quite limited set of departmental project, and to use use case by use case, which means starting with a very motivated team and ambition one, with a very clear objective, and identify ROI in order to be presented to the C-level, in order to scale quite easily. So bring together around the table a motivated team, including end user, data analysts, and tech experts, to master the whole data platform from end to end. And after a first project with a clear ROI, it will quite scale quite easily. But I'm not dealing about machine learning use case. I'm dealing with BI use case, which is quite simple to clarify the ROI and to make it production ready quite easily.
Absolutely. And Ivan, there, I just wondered whether you had just with that comparison against the BI focused use case, whether for other applications there were any other considerations that you thought were important.
Well, again, with the machine learning use case, there's a situation where you've got to understand what the model is going to give you information about. So again, it's you've got to decide what what you're trying to get out of the information. What's the question you want to answer? Because you can process the data and get an answer out, but unless you're able to actually do something actionable with that, with those analytics, there's not really much point running it and getting an answer.
Absolutely. Okay. And so then in terms of then, if we think about the strategies that we might employ, Barney, what do you think is most effective? And I'm sort of thinking of things like lift and shift, lift and reshape, drop and shop, the such like. What's your perspective on how we should go about this?
I don't think there is one answer to this, and everyone has their sort of views. I mean, my philosophy on it is you've really got to understand what outcomes and where the opportunities are, and sort of drive it from there, and really drive it to deliver value. And I think what's key on there, and Emmanuel put it very well, is you've got to sort of start incrementally, but you've also got to think big. So you could build bad technology on the cloud just as easy as you can build bad technology and capabilities, on on-prem physical kit. So I think it's really important up front to recognize that and do things right. So drive things through value. Very, very importantly, avoid starting to build new bottlenecks though in the process, because if you start to build those bottlenecks, you'll start to get a sort of disintegration and an atrophy of that sort of value very, very early. So you need to have sort of sustainable and scalable ways of doing things. So in reality, if you put those sort of two things together, that usually means that you've got to kind of start with what you've got and look for ways of sort of incrementally adding value there. So quite often that is, there's some fantastic tools now for orchestrating and replicating data, for example. So taking operational data and starting to, put that somewhere that you can start to run, analytic capabilities and workloads on, you can start to produce value very, very quickly. And, we've all seen demos of starting from scratch and manage, in theory anyway, and managing to replicate data out, in a matter of hours rather than sort of the months and months it might have taken in the past. So, so I think, to me, that's a sort of natural point for data-centric things is to start to use the data in those new ways, really prioritized by value. And then there are other, again, if you're starting to use good engineering practice on premises and containerization, etc., it's a lot easier to start to actually then put sort of broader services and capabilities into the cloud. But again, I think you've got to prioritize that by value, by your capabilities as well. I think you've got to be very, very careful there. And quite importantly as well, I think rather than trying to build a thing, you've got to build for the journey. Build for the journey, not the destination, because we've touched on it a lot here. We've got a lot of people with a lot of firms with heavy on-premise or physical footprints that have this aim of getting to a better state, exploiting the cloud. And the reality of the situation is hybrid sort of situation, and changing situation is going to be the reality for quite some time, unless you're sort of very small and there's not a lot of complexity in the sort of operations of your firm. So I think therefore it's good to focus on that process of how do we actually migrate, how do we integrate data, how do we automate things, how do we put the right controls in place, how do we embed data governance, how do we embed automated change processes, etc. And so I think we've got to, as we said, pick those right use cases to go with. But as we're going, really think of that sort of big picture in the longer term. Automate what we're doing in there. Look for those opportunities to lift things and break them out into sort of better architecture as well. And really drive it just by that scale of the opportunity. And I agree with Emmanuel's point from before that, I don't think there's some stuff should be on-prem and some stuff should be in the cloud. It's a prioritization game. You know, it's all about prioritization. You've just got to shift your high-value stuff first and look to exploit that opportunity.
Absolutely, and I think that, you know, prioritization is kind of key. Obviously, it's a number of different scales, and so we could, you know, think of that as one way of sort of evaluating our needs and things. And so, Ivan, if we sort of zoomed out again for a second, if we're sort of thinking about these migration strategies, what are the key considerations when evaluating a cloud analytics solution that you might be thinking of moving to?
Well, one of the most important things that we found is actually making sure that the platform that you're moving to is mature enough, because there are tools out there that people have been developing and they are quite exciting and good, but there are oftentimes where actually a simple, stable platform is what you need rather than the latest and greatest tools. Another thing that has concerned us in the past is a global footprint of the cloud platform. So because we're delivering solutions to clients worldwide, one of our latest projects, we've had to spin up environments so people can access reports in China, and so having to find a cloud provider that would allow us to do that and work inside the Great Firewall of China was something that we need to find. Now, ETL is a process that is not everyone believes or trusts in anymore and wants to call it something different. But if we go back to the original idea of that, you've got some data in a transactional database, and you want to take a copy of that so you can do some analytics reporting on it, there is a process where you're going to have to extract that data, transform it into a format that's ready to report, and then load it into an environment where it can be reported on. And the ETL tools that are available now are, again, many and varied, but the techniques and practices behind how each one of those work and haven't changed so much over the years. You have a source, you have a sink, you have a way of transforming the data in between. So it's very important to find the right tool to do that job for you, and a tool that is stable and will work with all your data sources.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought you'd finished there. I was just.
I can go on.
It's just that we've had a couple of questions come in, and I just, before we sort of wandered away too much from what these questions were relating to. So actually, both again from Joshua. So I'm going to start with the second one first because it's slightly more related to sort of strategy and choices. So he wants to know that whether so that they know that they're taking their existing analytics server infrastructure and they're replicating that on the cloud is going to cost them more than it currently costs them on premise if they were to use on-the-line TCO calculators. But longer term, they intend to look more intently at serverless and cloud-centric models. The question is, do you see a trigger point when making this change makes financial sense? Emmanuel, I think I'll point that one to you, if that's okay.
It's a good question. I don't know if I understand well the question. Sorry, Eric.
No problem.
He wants to. The question is to replicate the data in the cloud. And
so I think there's a question.
Yes, thank you.
The question of time is it because if you're replicating data and you're running services in parallel, you're going to start to add costs in there, and this is common. So to me, there's a couple of answers to that. One, again, look at the value of doing things, and you've always got a sort of short, medium, and long-term sort of horizon on that. And and it comes back, and with the point was made before as well. You've got to have some good sponsorship on this because there are some difficult trade-offs, especially at the start. You know, and you are going to sort of duplicate things. You can't always turn things off as you turn things on. So I think, you know, so I think you've just got to look at that. Where's the long-term value? Where's our direction of travel? And you've got to sometimes take a little bit of a hit to get there, because once you do see the value, I think, and as we talked about, experiment with it, that there's a, you know, that creates a momentum, and I think creates a payoff in itself as people see the opportunities of what can be done. It's very difficult sometimes to take yourself out of an old way of doing things and actually see the full extent of the opportunity. So I don't know if there's an exact trigger point. I think that's going to vary by different situations. And sometimes, you know, sometimes it does take a push to really, you know, a bloody-minded push to just go, okay, we've got to this point where we're getting some great stuff, but we've got this legacy cost. Okay, we're going to have a really big push now to move more of our capability out. And I think that's kind of a natural sort of cycle of things.
Okay, correct. Well, hopefully, oh, sorry, go on. I was
going to say, I was just going to add to that if you're thinking about you know, looking at serverless and more cloud-centric models in the future, why not start, as we said right at the beginning, why not try experimenting with that to begin with? Because there is an option where you can do some of the processing on premise and present the data in to very cheap storage in the cloud, and then run analytics tools on that against that cheap storage, and you won't have all the necessary, all of the analytic capabilities that you may want, but you should be able to find a compromise where, if you've done some of the transformation on your on-premise devices, stored it in cold storage that can be accessed by analytics tools such as Tableau or Power BI, you may get a lot of analytics that are available without having to stand up expensive servers.
Yes, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we have right now, we have customers who did the choice of what Ivan said, that just replicates the data lake on S3 or data lake store on very cheap cloud system. Other one put their data into more automatic system like Snowflake, BigQuery, and BigQuery is a serverless model. Snowflake is more cloud-centric model because it's based on the T-shirt, XLM, that kind of stuff. And it will depend on your expertise, on your target. If you are really no ops, we have some customers that don't want any ops. So they are more focused on Snowflake, that kind of stuff, because it's very automatic. And other one prefer data lake based on S3, cheaper, but you need to build your own tooling platform. So it will depend on your target, your budget, and and culture, and also culture, definitely.
Absolutely. And in fact, I was going to ask you, Emmanuel, from your experience with your customers, you know, how has big data, should we say, generally changed the needs of the organizations that you're working with when it comes to cloud analytics?
It's a really good question. Definitely, from my point of view, big data on-prem did not deliver promises because it's very hard to scale in production. And while it's very possible in the cloud, we've seen that companies want to exploit and need and have to exploit their data massively. For comparison, for the last 20 years, Amazon, Netflix, Uber have totally demonstrated how you can change retail industry, hotel industry, by exploiting the data, the customer data, appropriately to better understand their behavior. So they are showing definitely the way for all this industry and how the data is important to be, and it's part of the digital transformation. And definitely the cloud analytics are accelerating this in a very fast way by further shortening the implementation deadlines and the go-to-market for me.
Absolutely, and I think sort of when we think about those, those changing needs due to big data, we can sort of think about some of these things that have come to the fore recently, and I know a lot is spoken about data lakes, and I was just wondering. I mean, Ivan, I know you've had a love-hate relationship, may I say, with the idea of data lakes, and I was just wondering if you had some examples of how you've seen impact on organisations either you were with before us or now working with some of our customers.
I love the idea of a data lake. It's and the tools that are available for it are fantastic, and it's amazing just this concept of being able to, well, I'll just put all the data here and then everyone can access it and do things with it. But my real concern with that approach is that they don't then do the thought process behind what happens in a full enterprise data warehouse. And there's got to be a compromise. The tools out there are letting you access the data in loads of different ways, but that doesn't mean you should just throw it all in a bucket and let everyone have a go. What you need to do is take a structured approach to making sure you understand the relationships between your data and having sensible reporting around if there are if there is missing information in your data, and having a process that if there are broken links, if there is data missing, there is a process to go back to that source system and make sure that it gets updated and fed back into the data lake. And that's in a traditional transactional database. You'll have foreign key relationships to enforce that at the data, so the data's always kept in there. But as you try and bring data in from various different sources, you have to take a slightly different approach, and a data warehouse will give you that structure, but sometimes it can be too constraining.
And you mentioned sort of jumping in and letting everyone have a go, and I know you meant that in a specific sort of technical way, but actually that gives me an opportunity just to link back to one of the questions that was asked by the audience that I didn't get to touch on, which was, do you suggest setting up a governance approach to the cloud sandbox? And I think what they mean here is, would you endorse sort of the idea of setting up sandboxes for people to work in before you then hand off to business partners, and there being a proper governance process? I feel like this could be a very straight yes or no answer. So maybe we'll for a fun change, we'll go around. Ivan, from you, would you suggest that?
Yes, you have to do it. Okay,
Barney.
Yes, but maybe not in the traditional sense.
Okay, that's a yes, but maybe from Barney. And Emmanuel.
Qualified.
Okay, so I think the motion is carried there. Sorry. Oh, sorry, I thought you said yes.
Yes, so yeah, for BI usage, yes, but you need to, yes, okay. For BI usage, yes.
Great. Well, hopefully that satisfies the listener. We're drawing to the last 5 minutes here, so I just thought that perhaps I would ask all three of you the same question, if you could just keep your answers relatively short. But I'll start with Barney. Where do you see cloud analytics going in the next 2 to 3 years?
I think clearly this sort of integration of analytics into all business processes is going to continue, and I think the cloud is it provides smaller firms and startup firms with the ability to really compete there. I think we're going to mature a little bit, so I think there's going to be a lot more focus on some of the things that I've just touched on, so data ops, ML ops type things, so embedding controls and automation into the process. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the market on that at the moment. including sort of data governance and control. I think the data marketplace is going to play a bigger and bigger role in it. You know, we talked about ETL, so for external data, certainly I think it's going to be simplified. People are going to be able to, you know, tell their data. We're going to be able to just plug in and go, yeah, I want that. Can run analytics almost directly up on it. And then I think, you know, sort of services are going to continue to build up. So, you know, things like, you know, Data Robot, Avora, and, you know, some of the companies on this, on the call, you guys as well. You provide a service which allows firms to really focus on their piece of business while, you know, getting that expertise in from tooling, etc. And I see that maturing as well, and some fantastic tools coming out. Sorry if that was a little bit long.
No worries at all. And Emmanuel, what about your perspective?
First, probably the ability for people like Ivan, who like to build his own data lake based on a good tool, or people more who likes more all-in-one like a data warehouse. So there are both of them in the cloud, and this is definitely the good choice for me. From a persona perspective, my bet will be the democratization of the data usage through the entire enterprise, and not just for the pure data expert. And the famous data citizen who is not a data expert, but a business owner, just need to use and consume data for his daily task. And in that way, we can see the merge of data viz and data science tool in just one unique tool. From our perspective as a technology software company, we are very focused in our R&D on the automation of the analytic platform, with a reduction of data engineering useless tasks to fit end user autonomy and responsiveness performance. We are very focused on performance on big data set for BI and automatization for machine learning.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd wholeheartedly agree, especially with the democratization side of things. And Ivan, just very, very briefly then to finish us off, what's your perspective?
Well, I'm fascinated by the area of monitoring machine learning models. Basically, because as we're historically, you've been able to look at the data and make a decision. And a human may make that decision, but it will be them. They will then enter the data, and then it will be approved. So I'm sure Barney, with his finance background, will be aware of the concept of a four eyes authentication, where someone effectively proposes something, and then a human it's then signed off by someone else. So no one can approve 25 grand's worth of computer usage in one weekend. But what I think will start to happen is we will start to have machine learning models that are suggesting a analytics solution, and then that will be approved by a human. And then the really interesting bit is whether we'll get to the point where we almost have GANs, where a different machine learning model will be approving the suggestion from a previous one.
Yeah, absolutely, and that sounds like some fun stuff for us all to work on one day. Well, we're at the end of our time, so thank you very much, all three of you, for your insights and your answers. I'm sure the audience found it to be highly informative, and to the audience, thank you for attending this episode of the BI report. And we really appreciate you being here today, as much as we appreciate the panelists here to share their thoughts and insights. And of course, we would really appreciate your feedback on today's episode, and any suggestions for what you'd like to hear about in the future episodes of the series. So for me, thank you very much. Have a lovely evening and rest of the week.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Rana.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great fun. Cheers.